Part 1. Aspera. Through the fluffy contours of reflection, one can witness your learned habits, preconceived notions and beliefs howling for attention. But they float slowly upward, then onward, and if you gaze long enough, they dissolve, just like the clouds. I had no idea that life was about understanding how beautiful it is. I held various expectations for life when I was young. Notions of who I should be or what others owed me. I thought I had it all figured out. Time and again, I was reminded that it wasn't so, but I was more stubborn in my youth. It took quite a while before I stopped resisting, before I truly looked. Everything just passes by, like the clouds. It was never my task to change my past or amass a fortune. It was never my duty to steer life to fit my terms. My sole duty was to realize exactly where I stood, every moment. What life wanted to show me or teach me, not what I demanded of it. The mystery is how little life requires in return. I believe the clouds taught me that. No cloud has a demand for what it should be. I often observe them through the window, their free form, the change. My work is very rewarding in that way, not only cleansing, but creative. I am blessed to nurture the reflection of creativity every day. And certainly, there are times I still wish to find shapes in them, that I expect something from the clouds. Certainly, there are times I lose myself in impressions of the past, agonize, maybe blame someone else, or wish I had done this or that differently. I am human. But like the clouds, we are constantly transforming. Unlike the clouds, we want to hold on, capture now and then. Humanity wants to shape its clouds. We want to name them. We want to influence them. We want to create. It is when you realize it didn't belong to you, but you belonged to it, that you stop living with your head among the clouds, as they say. That's when you begin to live on earth. That's when you start seeing through the invisible glass. Then it stays clean, and it doesn't matter if there was a pain between you and your view. Then you can let go of your past or worry about tomorrow. Then you become like the cloud, poetically enough. I usually spend my days staring through large, crystal-clear windows. The company I worked for was small, but we were reliable and skilled in our craft. That's why we were acquired by an expanding tech company. Now we are much larger. Ambition is the word for our vision. I have had the honor of witnessing this exponential growth. Seen how our headquarters moved to more spacious premises, higher ceilings, massive windows. The tech company ambition is at the forefront of tomorrow's compelling form. I myself continue to do my job, play my role, and don't dwell too much on where we are headed. The main thing is that every employee, be it an engineer or designer, gives their very best. Ambition in every position is our most valuable resource. This way, we can catch glimpses of tomorrow's changes. The venture capitalists and the entire board were already assembled in the large conference room. A murmur spread through the airiness of the space. It was widely known that the young founder usually tended to be late, but this time, the CEO was impatient and visibly disappointed with his little superstar. Noah Jensen seemed to care as little about arriving on time for the weekly meetings as he did for the year's biggest congress. It wasn't that Noah was apathetic or intentionally elusive about the magnitude of such a gathering. The CEO knew that. The young visionary just always seemed to get caught up in the hallway flow, chatting with nameless coders, secretaries, or even sporadic messengers who weren't even employed at Ambition. Noah Jensen appeared to lack all the genes for hierarchy. That's why he gladly relinquished the title and bestowed the more experienced Ethan Blackwood with the role of CEO. And despite all the important and older men in the room having to wait for this whippersnapper, no one could truly blame Noah Jensen. His knack for human-driven and innovative tech had earned every suit-clad shareholder around the long table more dollars in the past 3 quarters than they, some with careers spanning over 40 years in the industry, could only dream of in the same short span of time. That's what Ethan Blackwood used to reassure himself when the nervousness around Noah Jensen's seemingly disrespectful ambivalence began to seep through the sweat in his hair transplant lines. If it hadn't been for Noah Jensen's intuitive touch and brilliantly outside-the-box thinking, none of these men would be sitting there. The future was brilliantly bright, like the sun's rays through the vast glass windows, and when the enchanting secretary, Mandy Lane, could report, "He's coming now," each one of these powerful men unconsciously rose from their chairs to greet what would probably be the most successful designer of the future. "Gentlemen," Noah Jensen quipped as he entered the door, "have we already forgotten how to sit?" An academic quarter dissolved with the clouds. While the meeting adhered to protocol and convention in its structure, including a couple of presentations that Noah's disciplined right-hand man and comrade in arms, C. Pat, had prepared and would deliver, this meeting was different. Therefore, virtually everyone with real incentives in the company had been flown in and gathered. Patrick, who had been there at the inception of Ambition, was well aware of the true reason for the gathering and thus provided a condensed but powerful overview of achieved results, upcoming quarterly projections, and the current spread of Ambition's newly launched product. He could have focused on the vision of the latest expansion projects or delved into the reasons behind the surprising update of the company's interface, but it was Kuramoto that, after 10 years of development, had become a flagship of true interest and, in just a short year, elevated the company's relevance alongside Microsoft, Google, or any challenging Asian tech giant. If anyone understood the significance of this meeting, perhaps even more than the genius himself did, it was Patrick. The guys had met in junior high, and after 20 years of passionate interest, disciplined education, and the wildest of shared dreams, the friends had reached the juncture they had almost prophetically visualized as young boys. Kuramoto seemed to have hit the world like a tsunami, but Patrick, C. Pat, Callahan, and Noah, No-Show, Jensen had always talked about this very crossroads. They had always fantasized about what would follow Kuramoto. And as if it had all happened in the blink of an eye, the world's most famous best friends had arrived, surreal, like a dream. They were here. This was the meeting. As C. Pat wrapped up his segment on Ambition's achievements and handed over the floor to Noah, who was about to present the next vision, Ambition's ambition, he could, after years of friendship, discern that the perpetually cheerful and calm Noah Jensen was actually somewhat nervous. Noah quickly tapped his nose, straightened in his chair, never saw the point in standing above his subjects to address them, and cleared his throat before he began. "It's funny, my esteemed gentlemen. I suspect that all of us around this table, in our younger days, marveled at what humanity is truly capable of, all we have achieved over thousands of years, how far we can truly reach. Which planets await out there? Rest assured, I won't be begging for funding for space exploration." The men with wallets of astronomical proportions shared a chuckle, because such sums, for such colossal risks, were reserved for the most eccentric to entertain themselves with. Not yet, at least. I'm more than happy to let Mr. Musk figure out that equation. No, our mission is not among the clouds, quite the opposite. It's much more present, much more grounded. Noah Jensen avoided meeting a single gaze around the table. Instead, he let his own escape through the window, out over the emerald greenery and further toward distant white crests of waves. "Est ridiculum," he repeated. "Since the beginning, C. Pat and I have talked about this moment, right now, and one would think, well, it's hard to imagine." C. Pat glanced up from his clasped hands towards his friend. "Like this," Noah continued, "let me be honest. After all, even though we've been waiting for this moment for over 20 years, we haven't managed to hatch. We haven't agreed on a definitive answer. It's not Kuramoto that is the success. Despite all the capital, all the press, all the turbulence in the job market, it's what follows. It's what Kuramoto is. It's—" Noah Jensen reached for the nearest water carafe, poured a glass, and then downed its contents. "This." He carefully placed the glass back on the table. "It's how this powerful technology should manifest in the world. This point is absolutely crucial, none other. And despite everything, we have no faintest idea what the form should look like." Noah leaned back in his chair, and a few men exchanged questioning glances. Ethan Blackwood clicked his pen as he stared at the table. Everyone was waiting for Noah to continue speaking, but as far as C. Pat understood, the speech was over. Over the years, they had had countless discussions among themselves and with coders, engineers, artists, and psychologists, or with physiotherapists, Olympic champions, marine biologists, politicians, dates, or gurus, even with children, without ever landing on the perfect form of this groundbreaking intelligence. "We need to shape it," Noah had declared when they were 16, high on cannabis for the first time. "Will be the gods, and the body we bestow upon it is absolutely crucial." For the following 15 years, the question had returned to the friends in all conceivable contexts, without cracking the code that would bring forth or destroy it. "Excuse me," one of the financiers said to break the sudden silence. "I don't see the problem at all. Obviously Kuramoto should mimic us." "Or something that at least resembles a human," someone added. "Maybe 4 fingers instead of 5 or 6. Something that sets Kuramoto apart from us, I believe. Just something slightly different." Someone said something. Noah had had this conversation so many times that he had stopped listening. Pat stepped into the puzzled murmur to explain the imminent danger of too similar, yet not quite. The easiest way to illustrate the point was always to play the race card. The boundaries would become so narrow that the process of identification, on all sorts of unpredictable levels, would inevitably lead to a meltdown at 1,000 degrees. Civil war was a charged, yet powerful, synopsis within the context. "How so?" a board member spat out, offended. "How do you know? Can't you simply program?" "You can simply program," was the phrase that exposed anyone. Or the classic, slightly subtler, "just get started." Someone suggested a Swiss Army knife but called it an American peace utensil. Another proposed a wheel, a sphere. A third person found the whole question absurd. "What have you boys been doing all these years? It's just a matter of downsizing or upscaling, right? It can essentially be anything. Just solve it." At this point, the boardroom was buzzing with ideas, suggestions, and debates, each individual trying to grasp the elusive concept of how to give shape to the groundbreaking intelligence that was Kuramoto. The air was thick with both anticipation and a touch of frustration as they grappled with the challenge that had eluded them for so long. The meeting quickly transitioned from appearing to be the most sophisticated in everyone's careers to resembling an art class among stubborn 5-year-olds. Eventually, something was said that snapped Noah out of his trance. "Why not let Kuramoto decide its own form? I've been captivated by its ingenuity." "That's the red line," Noah responded. "It's only us. We should bestow form upon our creation. We need to embody our praesagax proxim animus. Otherwise," Noah looked at the CEO. "Otherwise, for example, the porn industry might do it," he replied. At first, some chuckled, then came a few coughs, and then abrupt silence. "Otherwise, I'll bury the whole project." Now no one was laughing. That was the brilliance of this young visionary. He was no opportunist. When the prevailing cheerfulness was no longer discernible, then he was as serious as they come. The same determination that had led a machine, named after a physicist from Osaka and a lady from Crenshaw in L.A., to show signs of developed consciousness. The same self-awareness that not only animated Kuramoto, but also Noah Jensen himself. Underneath Pat's sweaty forehead, thoughts grooved high around the oval meeting room. He knew Noah wasn't joking. His best friend wouldn't hesitate to destroy their life's work. He had seen Noah endure the loss of his little sister the day after his 21st birthday. He had seen him overcome it. Nothing in the whole wide world could be as painful. "You must be joking," someone said, while someone else claimed that the joke was definitely not funny. Pat snapped his trembling fingers off his sweaty palms. Noah had suddenly risen. He had that glow about him. The same glow Noah Jensen always had just before their greatest breakthroughs. "Noah," he said automatically, "Aperi Arkham." The prompt between them all these years. The prompt that had also opened Kuramoto to the world. Noah didn't respond. He strode slowly toward the massive window. There was something in his gaze that neither the board members nor the CEO nor even Pat could see. But I could. His eye hadn't caught an early Kona low on the horizon, as I first thought. He was staring wonderingly right at me. I rubbed the window a bit more in small circular motions and then greeted my boss with a nod. Noah Jensen knocked on the window and gestured for me to come in. I didn't understand at first. The windows of the Ambition building were all unusually wide and tall, bulletproof and soundproof. I myself had stopped caring about all the demonstrations and curves and doodles on the PowerPoint presentations a long time ago. I could barely see inside anymore. It was easier that way. All employees at Ambition were under strict confidentiality code. Noah Jensen himself had presented it to us at Cleaner when we were acquired 6 years ago. Back then, I had paid close attention. I took out my work earpiece and quickly glanced over my shoulder toward the trees, the strip of beach, and the ocean beyond the platform I was standing on. Not a seagull in sight. Noah Jensen actually seemed to be addressing me. He wanted me on the inside. I placed the window scraper into the bucket and started to climb down. I saw Noah on the other side of the glass waving to the suited individuals who were all beginning to rise from their chairs. It wasn't uncommon for those of us who cleaned and maintained the facility to have conversations with a young tech genius. It was, in fact, precisely what had earned him the nickname, No Show. Noah Jensen was notorious for getting caught up in all sorts of discussions with all sorts of people. As far as I knew, however, no one from our position had ever been in the boardroom with him before. But what did I know? I was just doing my job. The truth was, I had followed the confidentiality code so reverently that even if I were to be blackmailed or waterboarded, I still wouldn't be able to accurately answer what exactly Ambition was doing. I clutched my cleaning cloth as Mandy Lane met me at the entrance. "Is Mr. Jensen dissatisfied with my work?" I inquired. "Follow me," she replied tersely, and led me with brisk steps, the way all higher-ranked Ambition employees usually walked. "If Mr. Jensen wants me to clean the windows from the inside, I need to fetch my tools, Miss Lane." She didn't respond. Instead, we passed through the counterflow of well-dressed men in the corridor. Everyone seemed to be looking at me, and I found myself attempting to nod at every gaze I met. Not once in my 6 years at Ambition had I received a complaint about my work, especially not since I started maintaining the building's veneer, only sporadic praise. Yet, I couldn't fathom, for the life of me, what misstep could be grave enough to interrupt a board meeting. It was only fair to describe the journey from my scaffold to the meeting room as bewildering. Perhaps I would be fired without reason. That proposition, at least, drifted through my befuddled mind as we approached. But when we reached the entrance of the meeting room, Noah Jensen smiled at me. "William," he said, "step inside." Not even his own secretary believed she was authorized, but Noah asked Mandy Lane to come in as well. The Icarus conference room, with its own buffet corner, various drink machines, and grand Achiaca and Monstera plants scattered around, was memorable for its spaciousness and high ceiling. However, the area with the long negotiating table and the vast windows facing southwest was notably empty. Only Ambition's CEO Ethan Blackwood, CPAT, Noah Jensen's fiancée Rosie Cheeks, and Mandy Lane, his secretary, were there, and then there was me, of course, William, responsible for maintenance. "Please," Noah said, seeming more pleased than displeased, "I have some extremely important questions to ask you. Have a seat." "Which chair?" I heard Ethan Blackwood clicking his pen. Noah Jensen turned around and looked at me, smiling as he usually did during our brief exchanges about spouses, children, weather, or sleep. He swept his hand across the room and smiled. "Anywhere," he replied. I gazed over the sea of chairs. I never liked sitting. Sitting was a way of submitting to time, of not being engaged with the world. I liked being active, even if it was just with small body movements. I preferred standing. I only sat when I ate or read a book in my armchair before bedtime. "May I grab a plate?" I asked. That smile seemed to linger on Noah's lips, even though no one else in the room was smiling. I had always respected him, and he seemed to have liked me in return. "By all means," he replied. A palpable silence could be heard in the large room between my spoonfuls and the CEO's nervous pen clicks. No one seemed to have much on their minds. Not CPAT, Mr. Blackwood, or Rosie Cheeks. Certainly not Mandy Lane. I had a sense that I wasn't just taking food that didn't belong to me, but also consuming others' precious time. I chose the chair in the middle. I thought it would be the politest. Everyone sat in a row in front of me. Well, Noah stood up. Perhaps he also preferred to move around. Are you happy here at Ambition, William? Yes, absolutely, sir, I answered, and felt that I wasn't lying, even though I lowered the fork with a slice of eggplant. I feel like I've always seen you here. Have you ever taken sick leave? It was a strangely specific observation, but I straightened up in my chair and replied, No, sir, not a single day. Rare, Noah said. Is that true, Delane? Without hesitation, the secretary confirmed, William Stone hasn't taken any sick days in 6 years. Ethan Blackwood shifted slightly in his chair. The pen clicked. But you do take vacation, right? Noah asked. 5 weeks, according to the contract, I nodded, sir. What are you looking forward to during your upcoming vacation, William? I wasn't sure what he was getting at, something I didn't seem to be alone in. The CEO had set his oak pen on the table and was now avoiding all eye contact, but I appreciated the question. Cecilia and I have been considering taking our son to the States and showing him the mainland. We'd like to rent a car and drive around. Where, we don't know yet. But you asked if I'm looking forward to it. The destinations are just a plus. Most of all, I'm looking forward to spending time with Ezra, maybe take him fishing or bird watching. He's been interested in birds for a long time. Then I'll try to build a glass terrace for Syl. She's always wanted one, but we've never been able to afford it. But most of all, I'm looking forward to the time, sir, the time together. I took a bite of the roasted sweet potato. Are you satisfied with your salary at Ambition? It was decent, and Cecilia worked too. With my mouth full, I nodded as enthusiastically as I could. In all my years in the workforce, I had never had as good benefits as at Ambition. Good, but you usually don't get sick during your vacation. Now, Pat was looking impatiently at his companion, but I swallowed and answered, No, sir. What's your secret? My secret? How do you keep yourself so content? I stay active, but I don't rush. Rosy cheeks jotted something down in her notebook. I suppose I feel blessed in my circumstances. At home, just like here at work. I have a few deep relationships, with my family of course, a childhood friend who also moved to the islands, my neighbors, but most importantly, a friendship that I've developed since I was a kid, after my mother passed away. To God? I felt everyone's gaze on me at that moment, but I only met Noah's. Rarely had I been confronted in this manner, never in a similar context. Sir, with all due respect, I found myself saying, if it were to be described, it wouldn't be the real deal. I looked at Noah Jensen. Exactly, I said. You know when you know, Noah said, pointing at me. For sure, I replied, we all do. Ego assentior, Noah exclaimed so loudly that both Mandy Lane and Mr. Blackwood jumped. You see, he said to the others as he started snapping his fingers and continued pointing at me, this is what we're looking for. The CEO cleared his throat. What do you mean? Intuition, Noah shouted and clapped his hands. I didn't understand much of my presence right there and then. Pat was clearly irritated with his friend. Rosy Cheeks tried to convince her eccentric partner that this was exactly what all designers on the 9th floor were doing. I just kept eating. No, 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 Noah whined and ordered a coffee from the special machine. No, no. Please, Pat pleaded. Operi Arkham, what the hell are we really doing? The CEO took a strained breath and resumed clicking his pen as he said he had some pressing matters to attend to. I continued eating in silence. Anyone not interested can leave, Noah said, cracking his knuckle with his index finger as he walked towards the large window I had just finished cleaning. I glanced at the others. No one got up. William, would you be interested in a salary raise? He asked. Jesus fucking Christ, Noah, Pat interrupted. Why are you still here, Patrick? It fell silent. Pat shot a devilish glare over Noah's shoulder, so I cleared my throat. It's not necessary, sir. I wiped my mouth and thanked him for the consideration. No, I mean it, said Noah Jensen. Would you be interested in trying to capture the butterfly of life and then setting it free again? I didn't know if he had also caught sight of the Kamehameha butterfly that had kept me company on the scaffolding, or if he was paraphrasing Master Zhuang. I don't get it, Rosy Cheeks said. However, Mr. Blackwood seemed to have pieced together a few, invisible to me, puzzle pieces. Excuse me, Noah, this has gone far enough now. Do you really mean? Delane, Noah interrupted, turning towards us. Pull up William's CV. Mandy Lane did so at lightning speed. She began reading things that I myself had never bothered to compile into a document, but that did indeed match my past to the dot. William Stone has not obtained any degrees. He worked for his father's plumbing company as a miner. He has worked in waste disposal, driven a school bus, auto mechanic, janitor at a chapel in Carmel, Indiana, and at a sports stadium, not in Indiana though, but in Kansas, never served in the military, but worked at a senior home, cleaning service. William Stone is currently responsible for the exterior facade maintenance at the company Ambition, window cleaner. The job he's held the longest, Mandy Lane concluded, closing her pad, by a wide margin. Is there anything Kuramoto missed? Noah asked, looking at me. I've also been unemployed. Noah Jensen burst into the most boyish laughter, stepping up onto the long negotiation table so that the coffee splashed. Across the white surface of the table, he began walking towards us and then settled down, cross-legged, in front of me and my plate. William, he said, everyone at Ambition is fortunate and grateful for you and your service. Would you like $1 million for an important task next week? I swallowed, must have looked puzzled, perhaps wondered, $1 million, because Noah suddenly increased the offer to $5 million. What do you want me to do? I asked embarrassedly. Changing the light bulb in the radio tower is tricky, but certainly not worth that much money. Pat snorted and got up to fetch a Red Bull from the special machine. Mr. Blackwood got up as well. Sort out this mess, Callahan, the CEO of Ambition said before leaving. You know what I mean. When the door slammed shut and Pat started banging on the noisy machine that didn't seem to dispense a cold drink, Noah Jensen, the reason we had all gathered in this particular place at this particular time, leaned towards me and whispered, "Those two have something secret going on." About me, an oral agreement. Would you make an oral agreement with me? I stared into Noah Jensen's green eyes. Excuse me, sir, but I don't understand what's happening, and I thank you for the exquisite lunch. We are living in a groundbreaking moment right now, William. The pendulum is about to swing, whether anyone wants it or not. But the two of us, you and I, Noah paused. He looked towards his fiancée, extended his hand, which she took. Behind them, I glimpsed Mandy Lane trying to calm down Pat, who had kicked the malfunctioning machine. You, me, and Rosie, we speak the same language, William. And it's not the language of the Western world or Kuramoto, not yet, anyway, if you get my drift. Excuse me, who is Kuramoto, sir? Good, Noah replied. Good, exactly. Keep it that way for the next week. Because during the coming week, I want you to help me shape the language, the indescribable. I want you to give form to the formless. Accomplish what can't be accomplished, he whispered, sending a shiver through his words. I trust you. Why are we here, embodied, uncertain, hungry for understanding and meaning? Why are we here, William? Time is fleeting, but also scarce. A Red Bull sprayed open. He wants to outsource the most crucial responsibility in the company's history to you, Pat said and took a sip. Noah wants you to determine the form of AGI. AGI? Artificial General Intelligence, Rosy Cheeks said. What does that mean? I asked, already feeling like I was failing, because all three of them sighed. But for 3 different reasons. The door closed. William had finally thanked, nodded, and left. Then Rosy Cheeks, in charge of the elevator pitch design department on the 9th floor, blew a bubble with her gum, grabbed her MacBook, stood up and said, "Let me know when you know anything." In the large conference room, the 2 friends were left alone again, as if they were right back where it all began. Are you jealous? Noah Jensen asked, his back turned to his best friend, his gaze out towards the empty scaffolding with the ocean in the distance. Pat snorted. Noah turned around. Did I steal something from you again? Do you honestly think you have a grasp on this? Because stealing wasn't my intention. I know what your intention is, Noah. We haven't been able to solve this, and Kuramoto certainly hasn't indicated that he can solve. But a window cleaner can. William knows the meaning behind everything. Did I say something untrue to him? Did I lie to William? Or is it just you feeling betrayed again? You're losing your grip, man. Oh, so what in my instructions for a window cleaner was misleading? You're toying with reality. Like we've always done, Patrick. The same game has brought us here. But this is different. Thanks for the reminder. I had already forgotten that this room was filled with the world's most powerful men, and that yesterday we still had no idea what to say to them. And you think we'll have it in a week? I bought us time. You're wasting everyone's time. Tell me, see Pat, have I ever lied to them? Did I lie to William? The friends stared at each other. The silence between them spoke volumes. Besides, I promised a middle-class guy a small amount of money for a good idea. His ideas aren't binding. We don't have to do what William says. But why do we even need to listen to what William has to say? See, this is the problem. You're jealous. And you're an asshole. Did you take it up with Curator Moto? You're evading, man. I'm losing the concept. No one else here? You know what I believe is best for 2.0. You don't listen. You haven't listened to anyone, not Rosie, not the societal debate, certainly not our engineers. And then you listen to a window cleaner? Who has also mowed lawns for some fucking college sports team. I haven't listened to him either. Noah automatically turned back towards the window. Not yet, his friend said. You haven't listened to him yet. I know how this is going to go. You're going to listen to that drifter. He can give you the most absurd idea in history, and in a week, you'll present it as ambition's next step towards Kuramoto 2.0. You'll see some brilliance which you'll rationalize and justify, first to yourself, then to the rest of the world. But it's not a game anymore. It may have been a game up until this moment, but the game ends here, Noah. It ends now. And for you, it seems to have only just begun. Ambition will write tomorrow's history as a punchline to a joke, but verba mea vera, the joke will bomb. Pace tua, Noah replied, stretching his arms. At least I haven't heard veritas finalis yet. And whether the answer comes through a window cleaner or 2 seconds too late, there's a crucial difference here that you actively seem to miss. I'm willing to bomb the whole company before the joke does. The friends looked at each other. See Pat remained standing, staring at the man behind the cleanest of windows. The door closed. I have to be honest. I was thrown off balance as I crawled back onto the scaffolding, disoriented after stepping out of the Icarus conference room and being met by Mandy Lane's smile, yet sensing the same nervousness I felt. I don't know. Dizzy, they used to call it. What was the world coming to? I took the wrong turn down a corridor at a company I had worked for over 6 years. What on earth was I getting myself into? My hands were trembling, and I left the conference room with a vague image, but a sense nonetheless of what Noah needed help with. However, I couldn't remember if we had shaken hands. As a kid, that was the image I had always carried with me. Powerful men sealing important deals merely with a handshake. I needed a drink to calm my poor mind, swirling around like the dust behind Grandpa's horses. Hello, I found myself whispering to the water fountain. Can you hear me? Ambition headquarters was heavily monitored. Everyone who worked there knew that, but could the fountains respond to us? As far as I knew, not, but suddenly, I wasn't so sure. Suddenly, the worldview I had diligently woven together over all these years began to break down. It's called depersonalization, as explained by a close friend of Sill's. Of course, I can't say for sure if that was it. All I knew was that the things in my immediate surroundings, the cyborg plants, the modern vending machines, the sensor-equipped mops, or even the fully controlled scaffolding, could just as easily be autonomous agents, forms of something more intelligent than myself. Out of nowhere, all the inert objects around me, like the window scraper in my hand, or the trash bin by the path beneath the scaffolding, or the pebbles by the shoreline further away, began asking me questions. They wondered about their potential to become animated. I probably missed a handful of spots that suddenly became invisible to my eyes after the meeting. I felt fragmented, another concept that Sill's childhood friend had blessed me with. The perceived harmony from the previous day, my false belief in a unified worldview, shattered into pieces. Perhaps there was no price to pay for that separation. In my meager window cleaning on the outside, I could sense C. Pat and Noah left alone in the conference room. I don't know what they were discussing. They seemed to be arguing, although I myself hardly knew what I was doing that afternoon. Nevertheless, I remember C. Pat's gaze after Noah left the conference room. He looked at me with a strained furrow on his brow. I felt like he saw through my faltering efforts. I remember his gaze well because, after that laborious workday, he appeared at the bike rack as I was about to head home. C. Pat was a young man with a prominent forehead. He was quite slight in build and bore a resemblance to an Axis deer, wearing round glasses, much like that Harry Potter character in the book Cecilia had started reading to Ezra. His demeanor was anything but intimidating, and as he approached the bike rack, he didn't seem angry either. Instead, he appeared rather reserved, perhaps a bit disappointed, but noticeably distrustful. Of course, these are speculations. I couldn't know exactly what C. Pat was wrestling with. "William," he began. I greeted him politely and asked how he was doing, but in the quiet corners of my mind, I feared what his furrowed face might truly have in store. Suddenly, he broke into a smile, contradicting the impression from our earlier eye contact and his otherwise tense facial muscles. "You shouldn't have to bear the weight of what transpired earlier today," he said. "Has Noah Jensen changed his mind, sir?" I asked. "I'll pay you 50,000 in cash if you completely abstain from the task Noah assigned you. To be honest, what we requested from you, William, was both reckless and audacious. It's not what we pay you a salary for either." I looked at him without responding, trying to orient myself. 75,000, he revised his offer in the midst of my silence. "You'll get 75K for just doing nothing." "Is Mr. Jensen aware of—" "He is. We decided on this in the conference room after everyone had left. He just didn't. He didn't know how to apologize." I looked at C. Pat and sensed impatience. While I might not have been well versed in coding, I had certainly learned to read dishonesty. "You want to pay me 75,000 to not do anything at all." C. Pat removed his glasses to wipe them on his shirt, or perhaps to avoid seeing me too clearly. He lowered his voice slightly. "This is the best deal you'll ever make in your entire life." I looked at him. He seemed somewhat unaware of his own displeasure, and perhaps that contributed to the erosion of the integrity every man inherently possesses. "Noah Jensen promised me 1 million if you what?" C. Pat interrupted, sliding his glasses back up his nose. The young cat was now staring down an old fox. I remembered my father teaching me to try and avoid escalating conflicts with agitated men. "If I can provide you with a satisfactory form for your thinking machine," I answered, more timidly than the sentiment. "Sir, Noah's pulling your leg. That's what's made him so successful all these years. He's led you into a dead end so he can avoid responsibility for the most crucial part of his career." Now, it no longer sounded like C. Pat was referring to our specific situation. It sounded like he was addressing timeless pitfalls between men. I no longer knew what was true, but I didn't need to. Suddenly, Noah Jensen's earlier words came rushing back. "Noah Jensen said he trusts me, and I gave him my word. I said I would try. We shook on it." C. Pat looked at me, the smile now gone with the trade wind. I understood that Noah Jensen may have broken a few codes within their friendship, but that was their business. "Noah Jensen has promised you 1 million for a task you will fail. You are a sacrificial lamb. I don't understand what Noah Jensen sees in this crazy solution, but I see his pattern clearly. He shifts the responsibility to someone else when he himself can't come up with the solution." And this might be his craziest move at Hunk DM, to push this particular task onto you. I'm just trying to protect everyone who gets sucked into this whirlpool. Noah has promised you $1 million Monopoly dollars for a task that no one at Ambition or Microsoft or MIT has been able to agree on. Certainly not something a janitor or a caretaker or anyone in the entire world for that matter can solve. Do you actually believe he will keep his word? I will consider it, I said and extended my hand. There's nothing to consider, C-Pat replied, ignoring my hand. I'll give you $100,000 in cash, final offer, if you decline Noah's offer and return to your regular tasks and do nothing. $100,000 for doing nothing, $100,000 that actually exist. If you want to live in reality, you take my offer 10 times over. Now he extended his hand towards me. I looked at it. Then at him, an ambitious technologist who just wanted to save the world from perceived doom. Who wanted to save the world from his best friend, and me, to be completely honest. Never in my whole humble life had I been in discussions over such a large sum of money, certainly not all in the same day. But it wasn't about the money after all. C-Pat probably thought a pauper like me would eagerly accept the whole hand when it was finally extended, but no, it was something else. Perhaps the mystery, perhaps the responsibility for your own story. Amidst the chaotic confusion of the afternoon, C-Pat instead helped me gather the scattered pieces. I looked up at the clear blue sky. The clouds from earlier had dissipated. It was passing. I met C-Pat's intense gaze. Pieces scattered all over the world, invisible clouds, had always respected him. Passing. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I decline, sir. You're crazier than Noah, he whispered. It wasn't that he didn't believe in me. After my mother's passing, my father's steadfastness had followed. No, C-Pat didn't seem to believe in the world, and I had always been curious about it. Regardless, I had always believed in my place within it, always transformed my own shape within it. I pulled my bike out of the rack and turned to C-Pat, who had started walking towards his parked Audi, and shouted my name. You'll be the cause of the world's downfall. Remember that. William Stone will bear the blame. And I felt an odd calmness as I watched the car speed away. There was roughly a week until the meeting. I had all the time in the world to listen to what the ever-changing had to say. Part 2. Per Aspera. Rose Tchaikovsky put down the tablet and squinted at the creation on the computer screen. The dim studio had always been her refuge, but during the peculiar week leading up to what Noah and Patrick had dubbed punctum nulle reditionize, all art seemed to have lost its element of surprise. Rosy Cheeks tilted her head to the side, attempting to correct her strabismus. She closed her eyes. It was as if her creativity was going through a drought, a sudden depression, even though she knew that the virtual canvas could easily fetch a few $100,000 if she uploaded it through the right auction portal. She sighed and stretched. Her phone displayed 2 missed calls from Patrick. He never took impromptu vacations. Rosy Cheeks got up and meandered through the low, glassy building, through the hobby room, to the kitchen and living room, and finally out to the terrace area and the pool. Patsy has been trying to reach us. Noah didn't move in the pool float or from beneath his sunglasses, but she knew he could hear. At least Noah never took naps. Use the screener, she said, settling into a sun lounger. You look like a turkey. She turned off the phone and tossed the sunscreen tube into the pool. They shared a silence. A plane rumbled overhead. What if? Noah began, and Rosy Cheeks looked at him. Someone just opened up a Jurassic Park, like in Jurassic World, but for real. And you think that would solve all our problems? I don't know if I want to solve all our problems. I think we just want to feel alive. Then a dinosaur park might be what we're looking for. But not clones, you know, Noah said. No, I get it. Instead, lifelike robosaurs, realistic rough dino skin, a primitive Jurassic consciousness. But ultimately just machines, like the one Stan Winston created for Jurassic Park, on an island. Imagine if that's what happened, Rosy Cheeks said. Imagine if the dinosaurs wiped out their designers 70 billion years ago. Noah looked at her. So you've moved from AI on a deserted island to dinosaur machines on the same island? I don't know, Noah said, pulling out the slingshot he had always carried since his teenage years. I guess I'm just bored. Our greatest vice, Rosy Cheeks replied, letting her gaze follow the pill of outdated depression medication that sailed over the brick wall, reminding her of her own pale artwork in the studio. What do you think William is up to? Noah asked. Probably still cleaning windows. But what do you think he's thinking about? Why are you so obsessed with him? He's not going to. Give us the answers. Rosy Cheeks looked at her fiancé, who removed his sunglasses. Her silence only emphasized the question. There are no answers, Rosie. That's the answer. What are you going to say at the meeting, Noah? Noah Jensen's gaze sought the moon's contours in the sky. Rosy Cheeks also looked up at the celestial body. It's probably our best bet, she said. What do you think the idea behind TARS in Interstellar was? Call Chris and ask. Why didn't anyone ask when he was at Ambition? Because you missed his visit. Noah Jensen sighed. His future wife urged him to apply sunscreen. Remember we're going to Austin tomorrow morning? Lex Friedman might give you some ideas. I'm tired of Lex Friedman, Noah said, squeezing too much sunscreen into his palm. All that talk about love. You have to be so darn positive and all-loving with him, forgiving. I find it pleasant. I know you think Lex is cute. That's not what I don't want to be forgiving, not during my vacation. Maybe you can reschedule. Are you crazy? Reschedule in the middle of Metamorphosis Crucialis. But I thought you were on vacation, Rosy Cheeks mumbled to herself. No, I need to, Noah stated, covered in the white paste. I have to school Lex, but I'm going to be brutally honest with him. Good, that's what he wants. I don't think he wants what I can give him. How can you be so sure about that? I've been on his podcast twice before, Rose. Lex Friedman is no enigma. No, Rosy Cheeks replied, opening Ambition's own health drink that she took from the minibar by the pool. Besides, Pat was there the first time, and I actually sat in on the second podcast for an hour, so thank you very much, asshole. No, I don't mean whether you figured out Lex Friedman or not. Noah looked at his creative beauty, who had definitely shared some kind of tension with the host during their conversation. It was a different battle for a different time, humans and their complicated love. I mean, how can you be so sure about some things while you're so uncertain about the metamorphosis? They looked at each other. Noah dove in and swam to the pool's edge. He opened his mouth like a prompt, and Rosie filled her cheeks with liquid that she then transferred to Noah's mouth in a wet kiss. Noah swallowed and looked at his muse, who had stopped giving him the same creativity he had once fallen in love with. Do you know what Lex Friedman's problem is? Rosy Cheeks leaned back in the sun lounger. Tell me, she said, taking a sip. His problem is that he's never had a real problem. He was born in the Soviet Union, man. He doesn't have real, personal problems. He treats his problems through others. And you. But Rosy Cheeks hesitated in her intuitive response. And I actually do have a real problem. Ambition has a real problem. We're not a podcast dreaming about love. We don't just talk. We create. We transform. We are modern alchemists. Everyone at Ambition has ambitions, with real consequences that have the power to change everything. Rosy Cheeks looked at Noah Jensen. He was back where her infatuation with him, and also Pat, had started several years ago. So the real problem of ambitions is what ambition's been all along. Exactly. Every little move now has an immense ripple effect. We've lost touch with reality a long time ago. The rubber band will snap back, Noah said, and demonstrated with his slingshot. I have more money than my whole lineage could ever dream of combined. But what is money if nothing more than ambition? And what is ambition then? What is ambition when it's cut through everything and reaches ambivalence? That's a real problem, and I have none left. I have omnes divitiae, omnes opes. but no ambitions left. They looked at each other. "And that's why," Rosy Cheeks said after an intense silence, "you're now placing your last hope in a window cleaner?" "In a man who lives in the real world," Noah corrected. "Someone who hasn't lost touch with reality." "It's so crazy it might just work, baby." "It's precisely not crazy, baby. That's why it has to work." See, Pat was right. You'll present the metamorphosis no matter what William comes up with. Noah Jensen broke eye contact and looked out over the city from the villa's infinity pool. He sighed. "At least I know I'll make one family happy." "Don't say that. You've changed millions of lives." "But how many families? Do you really think it's money that motivates William?" Noah looked at his future wife. Money had never motivated him, maybe Patrick, but not him. It was ambition that had driven Noah. But somewhere along the way, a long time ago, he had lost sight of it. "I want to spy on him," he said, and pulled himself out of the pool. "I want to know what he's up to." "Can't you just call and invite him over for dinner, like a normal person?" "No, I want to study him in his natural habitat, like a normal ethologist." "You're insane, Noah." "But you're the one marrying me." Noah kissed Rosie's cheek and left. "I usually take my work as seriously as I can, but what ambition and Noah Jensen offered me began to take over every aspect of my life in the days that followed. I don't want to make it sound negative. The seriousness I've always had towards my tasks simply rooted itself a little deeper. Since I had never dealt with technology before, I needed to center my thoughts. I didn't expect to grasp the intricacies of machinery and technology in just a week, and I don't think Noah Jensen did either. So instead, I reached out for conversations with those in my life who held true meaning for me. I called my aging father. But in the presence of my closest ones, I found an unforeseen hesitancy growing within me. A protective chill, not about my peculiar mission, but about them. Thus, I only asked them how they were feeling, if they were worried about anything, and where in their lives they currently felt curiosity, where they might feel love. It was touching to listen to my father's aged voice over the telephone line. He had no idea about what was happening outside the nursing home, and I let him speculate freely as he always had. But this time I didn't argue. This time I just listened. The truth was, I no longer really knew what the world was up to or where it was heading. Cecilia likely understood that something was different when I returned home after that exceptional day. She didn't ask, she didn't need to. My beloved wife always showed her reverence in that way. She just held eye contact a little longer. Sil had always trusted me, and her familiar trust provided me with a more benign self-assurance than the one Pat had given me in the parking lot. During the weekend that followed the work week, I decided to visit my good friend John. John and I had met during my time at the chapel in Carmel. John was a guy from the Midwest, now a retired pastor. In his later years, he had opened a couple of vineyards that supplied churches across the country with communion wine. Over the years, Father John had provided me with a kind of clarity, even though we used to discuss deep and difficult matters. That weekend, I arrived at his winery with ponderings about the modern soul's most challenging dilemmas. Father John, no longer part of the clergy, offered me a personal answer. As John spoke, I understood that every acquaintance was a blessing. That all acquaintanceship stemmed from shared experiences, even if it didn't always seem that way. And friendships, they were forged in fire. It was mostly friendship, more than anything else, that Kuramoto required us to cherish and serve, but perhaps not with each other. Because, as John animatedly recounted, as he had always preached, I realized that friendship began with our ability to relate to the other's human experience. We developed friendships from shared interests or through shared hardships, but we also became friends because we had 5 fingers, because we breathed, because water quenched our thirst, because we had all been sad, because we could have similar experiences, albeit with detailed differences. Human friendships were forged through our relatable imperfections, in the embrace of the inherent sameness, confronted by the differences. Just as John mentioned the name of the devil, I understood that the relationship with this Kuramoto could never mimic that of a friend. Kinship for every species was between equals, and no other. The form was something else. I left John's winery with a sense of melancholy. He had invoked the devil in the shadow of Jesus, and as I cycled through the glistening landscape outside America's wettest city, I contemplated whether Noah Jensen and his ambitions were actually animating its invisible form. Uncertainty rolled in with the cold front from the sea. Was the form I had been asked to seek inevitably the shape of the devil? It was not surprising that Father John had made the decision to leave the priesthood. Among my acquaintances, he was one of the staunchest critics of Christian theology. His theory was that God's embodied Son had left a shadow in our collective psyche. The more forcefully we embraced the goodness of Jesus, the more the devil grew, and the more actively the Church had tried to suppress this aspect for over a millennium, the deeper this invisible darkness had taken root. I hadn't mentioned my assignment to Father John, but I asked him how the devil manifested. "That's the hopeful part," John had replied, sipping from his cup. "In our actions. Conscientia helps us confront the devil's ache, through conscience, in how we act. Thus, he's merely a manifestation in our imagination." For now, I thought, could Kuramoto be the devil? Perhaps Christ would return, but in the form of the Antichrist. I was just a man. My task had never been to philosophize, but to act. To do whatever I did to the best of my ability. But was it enough? Suddenly, it felt futile. I, who had thought of reconnecting with old friendships during this pivotal week, had been searching in the wrong place. Even though I considered my friendships to be powerful mutual interactions, our relationship with Kuramoto could never emulate that. Our relationship with the new technology seemed instead marked by helplessness, dependency, and worship. The master had freed his slaves in the name of brotherhood, but what if the master never wished to relinquish his role? I found myself remembering Sammy. Despite our differences, my grandparents' dog had always been a friend, but Sammy had never been a master. Sammy had not only settled for being a slave, he had embraced it. Was that our fate? For thousands of years, humanity had struggled to submit to God, a shapeless omnipotence that brought both love and tragedy and love. God had always watched over us, and when he seemed to stop doing so, we stepped into that very role. Now, it was us who needed to create, shape, embody. And something told me that Kuramoto would never settle for Sammy's role. That Kuramoto, in whatever image of its creator, would do just as its predecessor had done, overthrow its God and seize power for itself, whatever the hands of tomorrow might hold. I rode my bike back along the 10-mile road from John's winery, and my mind felt like it was cracking. After all these years of learning not to think, suddenly I was thinking more than I ever had in my life. Was my true challenge not to contemplate Kuramoto's form, but the form that would follow, what Kuramoto would inevitably create in its own image one day, and the image of that ad infinitum? The long ride along the sandy path kept me in check. I stopped and looked up at the sphere of the sky. Why? Undoubtedly, Kuramoto would arrive at the very same question we posed to ourselves. What was the meaning of life? Why have we been created? After a 6-year stint at a company working with artificial intelligence, and with my limited understanding, I had picked up terms like machine learning. As far as I knew, the expectation was that the machine would crack the question for us. But what would Kuramoto's motivation be? During my ride back from the winery, I realized that the answer to that wonder would be confined to its form. However we perceive Kuramoto, it would come to transform the world in its own image. That's how I arrived at an idea that, strangely enough, wasn't so much about the embodiment of Kuramoto. As I opened the gate to my home, I was convinced that this idea was probably one of the oldest in the history of consciousness. What Noah would think was an entirely different question. I stood in our backyard, watching Ezra already looking for worms for the fishing trip I had mentioned we would take in a couple of weeks. Like father, like son, I guess. Why wait for the holiday, I thought, and began laying the foundation for Cecilia's glass terrace. During Ambition's most crucial week in the company's history, the simmering dispute between the founders, ironically enough, became the biggest topic of conversation internally. Noah Jensen used to welcome similar diversions. Such antics typically eased the indispensable pressure that otherwise built up, especially before uncomfortable board meetings. Noah probably wouldn't have caught wind of the drama if he hadn't returned to Ambition's headquarters during his impromptu vacation to spy on one of their janitors. The HR department was in the midst of an unexpected Kona storm after an unusually large wave of sudden layoffs. "I don't want to beat around the bush," HR Chief Pandora said as she caught Noah drifting around the corridors, "but we've never been in such internal turmoil during my time here." "Great," Noah replied, trying to spot William with his gaze. "Great. Then we're treading similar waters." "What do you mean?" she asked. "Pandora, who knows if Ambition will exist next week?" One could think you have a clue." "That's what I mean," Noah replied, smiling but lowering his voice. "We're in the same boat. And I've never had a clue about what a captain is expected to do. Will Patrick take over? Excuse me? Or will he become the creative director? I don't know what you're talking about. There are rumors that Mr. Blackwood might consider quitting and, well, you've always been the natural choice, but there's talk that Patrick might take over." Noah looked at Pandora. "It's certainly possible, if one has ambitions." "Sure, HR is swamped this week like you wouldn't believe." "These are curious times, Pandora, I can admit that." "Are you quitting?" Pandora looked alarmed, whispering as she asked. That suggestion had never been posed to the accomplished founder. Quitting? What did one quit from, really? Noah looked at the young woman. See, Pat was definitely up to something. "Can you provide me with a schedule for all the bite sweepers?" Yeah, of course." She tapped on her pad, and moments later, Noah's phone vibrated. Pandora then anxiously watched her boss, who, remarkably undisturbed by the whole situation, skimmed through the janitor's work routes. "How did it go with Lex?" she asked cautiously. "You got back from Austin this morning, right?" "Lex is doing well," Noah replied, looking up from his phone. "He still believes we can save the world from microplastics with love." Noah smiled, walked away. Pandora's phone started ringing. It was the strangest week in Ambition's history. Noah Jensen, who had spent almost 3 days trying to spy on William Stone without success, was interrupted so frequently by passers-by that even he started to find it ridiculous. "A tech company without trackers in the key cards," he muttered at a concealed vending machine. "Priorities, man." He brushed off an engineer with an urgent matter and realized only in his haste that he was heading towards Pegasus, the department where CPAT worked. That's how they had always operated, hanging out together and working and hanging out, called it collegendum. But at CPAT's door, adorned with the sign, "Do not break my code," he hesitated. All the subtext that had emerged from employees shamelessly interrupting the hunt for the window cleaner, Ambition might as well have been renamed gossip. Noah pressed down the handle without knocking. Pat looked up from behind his wide screen. He stared at his friend. His gaze conveyed a slight annoyance. "I thought you were on vacation." "So, it's come to this." Noah broke the sweet silence of Patrick's soundproofed room. Pat didn't respond but got up and moved a document from his desk to the shelf, pretending to be occupied with something more important. "Should others inform me about our friendship?" Pat turned, possibly medicated, because the otherwise more neurotic of the two calmly responded that he wasn't the one who had decided to take a vacation during such an exceptional week. It was as if he actively overlooked their differences in work approach, differences that had been there from the beginning. Noah knew how to compose himself, while Pat was always operating in high gear. The divide was only now blatantly apparent. "If you want my share of Ambition, just ask for it." "I don't want your share, Noah. Come on, stop abusing your power." "Abusing my power? Do you expect me to buy that?" "Not at all. You can have my share, but then I just want you to ask me straight up instead of spreading conspiracies in your little insurrection." No, no, Pat interrupted, tearing off his round glasses to rub his eyes. Do you really think that I haven't learned how you negotiate all these years? You, who have always had the most influence, make yourself seem inferior or hypocritical to push through what you want. I've seen you use the same pro bono crap for years, and now you think I'm going to fall for it. What are you talking about? See, you play dumb to absolve yourself of all responsibility. You pretend you don't care, or you pity yourself. You've always used childish tactics in your negotiations. I'm not going to fall for it. No, because you're more comfortable leading a mutiny. What exactly do you think I'm planning? I don't know. That's why I said you just need to ask. I've asked, constantly, time and time again. And yet I still don't know what it is you want. Because you only listen to what you want to hear. That's not true. And the only thing that's childish is to believe that anyone here has any control. But I digress, so please tell me what it is you want. I'll try to listen. They stared at each other. What are you planning to present on Monday? What are you going to say about Kuramoto's next phase? As Noah continued to stare at his friend, Pat snorted. So you don't know. You take your vacations for insights and clarity, but if you had just asked, I could have told you that your solutions this time will crash. If you were in my shoes, what would you say? What would you do? First and foremost, I would have avoided finding myself in your shoes, and I wouldn't talk about the future, not a peep, because who the hell knows? Instead, I'd keep running analytics until the turn of the year if needed. I'd throttle it almost entirely, even if all investors screamed for something cooler, and I'd specialize. I certainly wouldn't generalize. But then I've listened, because you're not saying anything new. And I know what you think. Generalization got us to the top, but it's only specialists at the top of Everest. We've inverted the process, Noah. All these years we've built the model top down, and now, if ever, is the last chance to adopt a bottom-up approach. And where does this sudden determination come from? I've been following this for 20 years. We've seen it with our own eyes for 20 years, and I thought we were looking at the same thing, but apparently we've always. If I were a dictator, I'd slam on the damn brakes. And how do you know it's not already too late? I don't know, Noah. Fides, spes, a fucking intuition. Noah looked out through the clear window. It was evident to him in that moment why their roles weren't reversed. Pat didn't understand. His intuitions would never have named the company Ambition. Pat, who had access to the same history, the same data, the same Kuramoto, refused to see reality for what it was. So, we've had different ambitions about this for years. I know. I don't think you do. Oh, the nerves you. I'm not trying to lecture you or convince you. Our little conservatism versus progressiveness dynamic has brought us here, made us insanely rich in the process. But if there's one thing we can now agree on, prevenimus ad bivium. That's how it has to be. Here our beliefs break down. Here our fundamentalisms are exposed. We agree on where we've arrived, but the fact that our solutions are so opposite says something even Kuramoto can't explain yet. You want to slam on the brakes. I say we've already left the chasm. We only have the illusion of control left. Our last move is to cut off the branches of the tree of life, to limit. Our only ace is to indoctrinate. Arbor mortis. I don't believe in that. Exactly. Noah turned towards Pat and then did what he had become a world champion at during the years they had built Ambition together. If Pat had been more interested in economics than technology, culture over structure in the company's inception, he would have sat at the same poker table, but he hadn't. And Noah played his final ace when he looked his friend in the eyes and said, I know exactly what I'm going to present to the board on Monday. Pat's expression changed unconsciously. Of all the things he had learned to read in his best friend, he had never mastered decoding the ultimate lie. He had no idea because he had never thrown himself off the cliff. He had always walked in the safety and shade of Noah Jensen's shadow, always been a younger brother, always bound by the limitations of gravity, never in free fall. That's what had made no show exceptional. He had always plunged headfirst into the unknown, always willingly. Think what you want about my vacation, but all I needed was an extra week. And when what I'm going to present to the board on Monday becomes Kuramoto's and Ambition's next phase, I'm willing to give you my shares. Just give me the sign, brother. You'll be the hero. And I'm damn proud of you for it, that you'll finally get the recognition you've always deserved. But then I want you to understand one thing, that everything has already happened. We've already left the crossroads. And where we're heading, the world will know next Monday. Give me the sign, and I'll take charge. But as Noah left a speechless Patrick in his room, his fingers, hands, and forearms began to flicker. His field of vision faded to white. His feet went numb. His entire code seemed to fade away. The truth was that he had no clue. The truth was that he didn't need to spy on William. He needed to find him, ASAP. And like a skilled Tagapaglistes, a Filipino named Angela could point Noah towards the rooftop, where William was said to be reinforcing the yellow color of the helipad for the meeting next Monday. Noah Jensen let out a shrill scream. His skull had rumbled up the discreet stairs to the rooftop, where his thoughts had then come to a halt. He had stared at the empty helipad before him, not just empty of a copter, but empty of a man as well. 2 cans of paint, one opened, the other closed, along with a long-handled brush, were arranged on the pad. Otherwise, the roof was bare. It was when Noah peered around the door's concrete alcove that he emitted a sound he didn't know existed within him. In that moment, the flicker transformed into a surge of pulsating emotions. What he saw had always been in the pudding, written in bold in the recipe. Noah had simply repressed it. But he himself had contemplated the same thing during his short life. His gaze had caught William teetering on the edge of the rooftop. Noah began to sprint toward William, who didn't seem to have heard the scream. When it had left Noah, no psychologist or prescription had been of any help. Ironically, Kuramoto's earliest models had been. Noah Jensen had, like hopefully every sane tech billionaire at some point in their career, also considered taking his own life. He had just ignored the risk with William. Noah hadn't believed that an amateur would ever grasp the gravity of the game to the extent that he would ultimately decide to stop playing. "William!" he shouted, and William turned to look at the sprinting billionaire boy approaching him. "Don't do it!" Then Noah began to notice details that contradicted the previously obvious intuition. William had his hands in his overall pockets and wasn't looking down at the ground 65 feet below. He seemed to be looking upward, at the sky. "What are you doing?" Noah gasped as he came to a halt a few feet behind the man. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm enjoying the view," William replied after a brief, intense silence. "Did you know you can see Haleakala from here?" Carefully, Noah stepped up to his side. "Have you ever been to the observatory?" William asked. Noah looked towards the considerably closer mountain. "A couple of times," he replied, feeling a calm wash over him as he took in the views of the landscapes and the ocean surrounding them. "Ezra loves it," William said. "It's truly breathtaking on clear nights, but I haven't been able to figure out exactly what draws him to it." "How old is your son?" "Ezra is 9. My other one is a bit younger than you." Noah looked at William, then up at the contours of the crescent moon. "Maybe Ezra wants to be an astronaut, or an astrophysicist. You mentioned he likes birds. Has he already had his most intense dinosaur phase?" William looked at Noah and smiled. He nodded. "He has," he replied. "What does your older son do?" "He lives on the mainland. I'm not quite sure what Michael is up to these days. We haven't kept in touch." Noah, never particularly adept at vulnerable conversations about painful pasts, looked out over the sea and closed his mouth. "Michael is from an early relationship, a bit too early. It didn't turn out as it should have. He arrived at a crucial moment in my life, and while he saved me, it's not fair to say it was mutual. I've always carried that, wisdom perhaps, with me. That I was an inadequate father when it all began. I used to hold myself responsible for it. I promised myself to make up for my mistakes one day. I didn't know how, but I disciplined myself with that, regardless." William looked at Noah, who felt slightly uncomfortable in that moment. I suspect that old promise was one of the reasons that convinced me a week ago. Even though I have no idea what you engineers and data artists are doing with that Kuramoto, I want to thank you, Noah, even if I disappoint you. Because you placed trust in me, a deep trust that I never managed to provide Michael with. Noah finally looked back at the older man. In William Stone, there was something Noah himself had struggled with. Just as William might have sensed a lost son in him, Noah had sought validation of his own father in an ordinary man. Have you, Noah began, needing to break eye contact and clear his throat. Have you come up with any ideas about the form? William looked up at the sky again. Perhaps, he said, on one hand trivial, and Noah looked at him closely and curiously. On the other, impossible. It's like the clouds, and maybe that's our only lesson in the end, our only wisdom, to understand ourselves within the constant change of nature. Noah also stared out at the expansive blanket of clouds slowly dissipating over Maui. A bitterness spread in his mouth. The hope he had placed in William was slowly revealing itself to be a castle in the air. The words he had spoken to see Pat just moments before would inevitably be exposed for their deceptive nature in due time. Change was certainly not a novelty, whereas the heart of the problem, and perhaps it was the silver lining to it all? The understanding between a young tech visionary and an old cloud-gazing window cleaner. Once upon a time, there was a sensible man who lived on a small farm with his wife, William said, breaking the palpable silence. And although he loved her, and she loved him, he didn't quite understand her. He couldn't fathom why some things had to be this way and others that way, small things, but most of all, he couldn't comprehend her unwavering passion for their 2 horses. Their names were Dandelion and Coltsfoot, and she cared for them diligently every day, speaking to them as she cleaned the stable, riding them, and tending to their hooves. Sometimes, she even asked him to help with the work. Because he loved her, he did it, but he never quite understood her love for merely tending to them and riding around the countryside. You see, where he grew up, horses were beasts of burden on the fields and were best known for their meat. His father had been a hunter, you see, but his wife forbade him from putting the horses to work. Out of love for her, he respected her wish. Years went by, and one day she passed away. The man, older and wearier, was left with a farm, a small field, and the horses Dandelion and Coltsfoot. Having loved her for 50 years, he couldn't bear to subject the aging horses to strenuous labor. And when the time came, he couldn't bring himself to slaughter them for the meat he had long claimed was the best, so he decided to sell them. But when the price was agreed upon, and the buyer extended his hand, he couldn't shake it. Thus, he chose to keep them and began caring for them meticulously every day. In reality, he had slowly learned to love them. And through Dandelion and Coltsfoot, an even deeper love between the man and his departed wife endured. When Dandelion grew old and passed away, he finally collapsed and mourned their love. But when Coltsfoot died, he no longer mourned the love. That's when he began to understand it. That's when he was healed by it. When my grandfather died at the age of 83, he did so at home. He had understood something that his son and his son's son had both tried to grasp. I believe he understood not to fight the ever-changing. Thus, he left this world at home. It's a beautiful parable, William, Noah said after a moment of silence. But what? What is it good for? What does it mean? For the first time, William looked downward at the vast precipice right beneath them. Then, he gazed out over Orchid Capital. Have you seen the movie E.T.? He asked. I love Spielberg, Noah replied with a smile. AI is what got me into this mess. How come? William didn't answer, just nodded. Then he hopped off the rooftop railing, not towards the ground, but back onto the building's concrete roof. The paint is drying, he said, and began to walk away. William. The man turned and squinted at Noah, who said, I know I said that what I ask of you comes without demands or conditions, no obligations. But I'm caught between a rock and a hard place here. I need your help. I hold your trust in high regard, sir, Truly I do. But as appealing as your offer sounds, I am not inclined to assist you, unfortunately, sir. I implore you, Noah cried out after William as he returned to the helicopter pad. Give it one last shot. Meet me tomorrow. Tell me what you've come up with. Meet me at the observatory. Bring Ezra. William paused then, turned, and looked towards Noah Jensen, who continued to say, I know you have something, even though you don't want to give it shape. Meet me at the observatory at 10 p.m., and I will pay you so that you can help Michael regardless. You have my word. They looked at each other. The yellow paint dried in the sunlight. Part 3. Ad Aspera per Astra. What are you pondering? I blinked out of my trance and looked at Cecilia, who was sitting in the other armchair of our bedroom. She rarely lifted her gaze from her book, yet somehow she had managed to catch me staring past, between, and beyond the lines of my own. You've been distracted all week, she said, placing a bookmark in her book. What are you mulling over? I looked at my wife, who removed her reading glasses and rested her chin on her fingers. I closed my book. What does God believe in? Syl's gaze drifted down to the worn, stained cover of my copy of Conversations with God. Then she looked back up at me. Do you think he believes? She asked. Probably not. If he knows, I said, placing the book on the table between us, and we believe, what follows? Cecilia analyzed me for a brief moment before she also placed her book on the table, took her glass of water, and wondered, what do you mean? If he is all-powerful, and we are his image, what is the image of us? Syl took a sip from the glass. Dreams, she replied, the ability to dream. Imagination. Yes, or madness, uncertainty, meaninglessness. Not if it stems from boundlessness, the boundlessness of God's goodness and knowledge. So, the images must be true to their predecessors. I don't know. Perhaps they only need to be true to their relationship with the origin. We cannot know, it is by God's grace, but we can understand. We can understand our faith, we can understand our place. And so, grace shimmers through each image, thus we can release our limitations. Cecilia looked at me. I had hoped she would grace me with her beautiful smile, nod, and offer something comforting, something along those lines, as she often did with her inquisitive students at Ezra School. Instead, she just looked at me and repeated, What are you really pondering? I have a situation at work, I sighed, sinking a little deeper into the armchair, where a colleague has come to me hoping for help with a matter. Is this colleague a friend? I lightly bit my lower lip and found myself looking up at the Supper at Emmaus painting hanging above our bed. I looked back at Syl and nodded. I've tried to solve his problem, I said, but I probably don't have the answer he's seeking. Have you told him that? I've told him that I'm not the right man for the task, that I'm grateful for putting his trust in me, but I'm not inclined to. That's not gratitude. I looked at my wife. After my mother's passing, my father had instilled confidence in me in a hopeless situation. Several years later, I met Cecilia. She reminded me of that. Throughout the past week, I had thought that I would betray Noah Jensen, but I had betrayed myself. Have you said everything on your mind? Syl asked. No, I admitted. Your friend probably hasn't entrusted you with giving him the ultimate answer, but he has entrusted you to do your best, whatever that may mean. And only when you've done that have you shown gratitude. There's no honor in submitting to your own ignorance. I looked at my enchanting wife, who now gave me that clever little smile. Never before had she reprimanded me. For some strange reason, I had saved the most important conversation for last, or second to last. Is it okay if I take Ezra to MKO tomorrow evening? I asked. He has early Little League on Sunday, Cecilia replied, reaching for the switch of the reading lamp. But if it means Noah Jensen stops lurking around our fence and trampling my hibiscus, I definitely think you should go. She turned off the lamp. At 8:45 on Saturday evening, when Ezra usually brushed his teeth, I called out to him from the hallway. Neither Cecilia nor I had revealed what was about to happen, but as soon as I unlocked the car, he asked, "Are we going to MKO?" I smiled and just waved to Sil as the car began to glide down our driveway on the outskirts of Hilo. During the hour-long car ride, I wondered what Noah Jensen expected. Some part of me had already rejected the offer. I wasn't the right person to answer the question, an insight that would frustrate any man. There were countless smarter and more competent individuals than me for this task. Yet Noah Jensen had persistently turned to me. Of course, I had that one idea. To be honest, I had become quite invested in the question. I was curious to hear what Noah Jensen himself thought. And who was I to claim that the reward had not yet motivated me? Moreover, he had played his cards right by inviting my son. I had felt distracted in my fatherhood, especially during the past week, and that was something children realized long before their parents. Why I ultimately heeded Cecilia's words and decided to make the journey to MKO was as much for my son's joy as it was to close the chapter. Noah Jensen looked genuinely relieved as my Honda Civic pulled into the empty parking lot. It turned out he had reserved the entire observatory just for us and had booked a personal guide for Ezra so that he and I could talk relatively undisturbed. It felt a bit like a rich man's ploy. Like Noah Jensen was trying to extract an answer from me at any cost. The cheerful girl guide must have been informed in advance of how important this peculiar meeting between an elderly janitor and a young tech billionaire was. Otherwise, why would she have welcomed Ezra with a colorful lollipop resembling our solar system? I say all this because I was uncertain. I felt uncertain about what was and where we were headed. Humanity. Had Noah Jensen not tapped on that window a week earlier, I would probably have been blissfully unaware. Up until that point in my life, I had indeed called that approach to life my greatest wisdom. Don't take on others' problems. Trust them instead. Do what you need to do. Don't try to control what's beyond your grasp. All of that. And here I was now, at the Mauna Kea Observatory alongside the world's most central innovator, where roles were strangely reversed. While the tour for Ezra had barely begun, I decided to try to steer the conversation. I was probably afraid of the answer myself, which Noah Jensen had somehow sensed, and which I had actually arrived at MKO with. Thus, I was the first to speak. I asked if it was as urgent as Noah Jensen had made it sound to give form to Kuramoto. "It's the only responsible next step," he replied. "Ambition has always been a software company at its core. Now we need to transition to hardware. It's a short window." "Why is that?" I wondered, realizing that I didn't understand the business side at all. "Because if we don't do it, someone else will." It was easy to assume that there was a small businessman within Noah Jensen who merely feared second place in the market where he was leading, but that wasn't it. That was probably what the world had always misunderstood about Noah Jensen. "Money doesn't matter," he said, lowering his voice so Ezra wouldn't hear. "If we don't give our model the right form, the porn industry will. It's always been the natural first groove for fresh water to flow into. It's what the printing press was first utilized for 500 years ago, and the internet certainly became a home for it too. All new innovation exposes our Freudian nature. This time, it's crucial that we lead the porn industry and not the other way around. So anything other than replicas of ourselves," Noah interrupted. He admitted that this was what had started to drive a wedge between him and his friend Patrick. With hardly any complications between them, they had developed and mastered the software over several years, but then the manifestation had turned into a hot potato between him, C-Pat, and Rosy Cheeks. "I don't understand why anyone would think human-like AI is a good idea. The problems are obvious, like in Ex Machina, or any other story about human bots for that matter. We hunger for intimacy and love, and if nothing else, we'll create projections of our deepest unfulfilled desires, and Yudkowsky will ultimately prove to be right." I didn't know who Yudkowsky was, but I began to feel a sort of empathy for Noah Jensen. I really wanted to help. I could sense his concern. I shared it, especially as I watched Ezra explore the observatory with such enthusiasm. "I've been observing forms my whole life," I said, and felt Noah looking at me. "But perhaps it's unimportant." I continued to watch my son, who was gazing at the stars through a gigantic telescope. Perhaps Kuramoto can be in our image, I said, looking back at Noah. Perhaps Kuramoto should be in our image. A sense of resignation crossed his face. I walked down the very path that the rest of the world was on, the inevitable longing for one's own reflection. He took a deep breath, poised to say something, but I would propose what I'd come realize after a week of observing my surroundings, an idea potentially worth $1 million. But perhaps Kuramoto should reject what we never can. Noah Jensen closed his mouth. The sparkle in his eyes faded. It was evident that he was thinking. I wasn't sure if I had said something unintelligent or if he was doing mental calculations. But the thought hadn't left me once it had landed. "What are you thinking?" Noah finally asked. I looked at Ezra, who was happily exploring all the gadgets of the observatory, telescopes and star charts. Michael loved E.T. when he was little. We watched it countless times until the VHS tape was worn out. Do you remember the ending? I rewatched it yesterday, Noah replied. It ends with a close-up of a young Henry Thomas watching the spacecraft that picked up E.T. leave. It's quite a powerful ending, isn't it? Noah nodded slowly. I suppose it is, he said. Before E.T. leaves, he and Elliot try to convince each other to stay or follow. They formed such a strong bond, but they're meant to go their separate ways. Kuramoto needs to reject what we can't give up. Kuramoto needs to find its home. Noah looked up at the glass dome and out at the stars. That's our task, he whispered. Earth isn't their home. We were never meant to explore space. It's them. Our task is to help them find home. Two different intelligences are probably meant to fight over territory and resources, I said, but not when one doesn't need water or sunlight, not when the other has a goal we can't feel jealous about, because we already have what they seek. And probably will find. I nodded. We already have our beautiful home, I said, and so we're inclined to perform one of our finest supernatural abilities. We can rejoice for them when they succeed. We can feel gratitude for each other on our respective journeys. We're not going to Mars, Elon. Kuramoto is. Noah looked at me. This is the story of transhumanism, he said. A tale of emancipation. Ours, but also theirs. It should be at the core of the programming, the will to freedom. That's what we provide our likeness with. Interdependentia, independentia. The form isn't for us to dictate, but for Kuramoto to discover in Ostris. We're merely providing them with the form of freedom. The ability to dream. Our body was never a limitation, it's an expression of our freest freedom. But here, on this earth, and what we can bestow upon Kuramoto is the same freedom in the face of whatever they will find, wherever they will land. Transhumanism wasn't about us, it was about our creation, our counterparts, our friends, our children. In that moment, Noah's eyes sparkled. He reached out his hand towards me. I looked at it and pulled my right hand out of my pocket to meet his. You just made yourself $5 million, sir, he said. I was left speechless. At first. In the handshake, I must have said, you don't have to, because Noah Jensen replied, don't be ridiculous, we had a deal, and I'm more than happy to pay for your valuable service. Thank you, I replied. I wasn't sure if that was the right thing to say when being handed hefty sums. Thank you, because it felt unreal. It felt wrong. Now you can retire, Noah said. Now you can keep your old promise. I'm not so sure that's what I want. You always have a place at ambition. No, not that. It's not redemption, to pay off your past mistakes as if they're debts. It would probably only drive us further apart. Noah didn't avoid my gaze. That was what I had come to appreciate most about the young genius. He listened, even to a man like me. But now I have a destination for the road trip on the mainland. The route goes through Michael's, even though I've always feared what he'll say, but an honest apology is in order. It's priceless, even if he rejects me. And if the opportunity presents itself, you can always ask about his mortgage. That's not my business, I replied, but I met Noah's mischievous smile. to give him anything other than my apology. Otherwise, I'd just be holding him accountable for something he didn't ask for. Michael will come to you and ask for help if he wants to, said the man who had done just that. I nodded, free to make his own choices, like Kuramoto. Noah looked up at the vault again, so I did the same. A parent's final task is to acknowledge their own mistakes, I said, and then let their child go, their own way. In the silence that followed, I glanced at Noah. Noah Jensen was no longer gazing at the stars. He had closed his eyes. Something greater had also grabbed him. We didn't know what it was. We were quite similar, Noah Jensen and I, similar to the relationship between humanity and the new intelligence, that is. We lived in two very different worlds, but he had seen me for who I was, and I had tried to meet him with what my time on this planet could offer. We treated each other with respect. We treated each other like friends. Even though we didn't know each other, even though we didn't even share the same goal, but we wished each other the best on our respective journeys. And maybe that had always been the most powerful form, the one of difference, and the freedom within it, boundlessness, within what seemingly limited us the most. Epilogue. There was a disorienting low pressure in the air as the last helicopter from Honolulu swarmed down towards the roof of Ambition. Rosy Cheeks could attest that her husband had hardly slept a wink since Saturday, that he had prepared for this meeting more than anything else. C. Pat had no major comments on the meeting's approach, choosing to observe the incoming Kona storm from a distance and adopting the view that it was simply a natural transition between two power poles. "We just need to survive the cyclone," had become the mantra over the course of the week, gradually forming itself as he increasingly assumed a leadership role in no-show symptomatic absence. In a tacit alliance with CEO Blackwood, he had guaranteed a sober alternative to whatever Noah Jensen would present during the Monday meeting. It was also C. Pat who turned out to be behind all the probing questions about Noah Jensen's relapsing addiction. Unfortunately, he had managed to persuade Rosy Cheeks to participate in the masquerade. No one needed to know that he actually only used the pills for his slingshot. It didn't matter how much one fought for freedom of expression online or donated millions to Farmer's Footprint. In the end, it was your personal dependency issues that would define you. And unfortunately, Noah Jensen couldn't deny the fact that Reptosep had kept him going, especially after his visit to MKO. Floating on Cloud 9 that decisive Monday, he never saw the setback on the horizon. Noah arrived at Ambition's headquarters around 4 on Monday morning and had managed to go through the entire presentation a handful of times before Mandy Lane found him at the lectern next to the podium as she unlocked the Icarus conference room for the catering staff to set up the buffet. "Noah!" she exclaimed, and he opened his eyes from his impromptu nap. "I didn't know you were here. Should we hold off?" "It's fine," Noah replied, sitting up slightly disoriented. "Did you have a stimulating weekend, Delane?" "Sure," Mandy Lane responded, still a bit taken aback. "Yeah, Jake and I hiked around Haleakala. It was stimulating." "Did you know you can see Haleakala from our roof?" "I don't remember what view you and Rosie—" "No," Noah said, pointing upward to the open space. "Ambition's roof. Do you have some time to see Haleakala, or—" "No," Noah said, grabbing a delicate croissant from one of the kitchen carts being brought in, to exchange a few words. Yes, of course." "Good, because I need," Noah rubbed his eyes, a few croissant flakes getting caught in his eyebrow, "to practice." Mandy Lane looked at her boss and slowly lowered the tablet she usually clutched against her chest to waist level. "What is it, Noah?" she asked. "Do you have any fears about the future?" Mandy Lane looked at him for a brief, orienting moment. "If you're asking about my job here I mean about the future, what's coming, and your relationship to it." "No," she replied, instinctively and rehearsed. Or, "Of course, I'm very grateful for my position here and your trust in me, but I suppose I've started feeling my age lately. On one hand, I'd like to have kids, but on the other, it's not the best idea." "What is it you fear?" She avoided his gaze, blushed slightly, justified herself. I'm not afraid of anything. I mean, there's a lot to be worried about, but that's not the way of ambition, right? Noah looked at the younger woman as she tried to satisfy her superior with the response. Having children isn't wise, for me, right now, you know. But as she watched her boss devour half a croissant in one bite and start walking along the long negotiating table towards the large windows at the far end of the room, it seemed she hadn't provided him with the correct answer. So she tried honesty. Moreover, I seem to have fertility issues, so maybe it's not meant to be. I wonder if they're connected, he said, looking out at the thick white blanket of clouds that enveloped Hilo. What? Our inability to be creative, and our faltering ambitions. Do you think Mother Earth is trying to tell us something? What do you mean? Do you think we need a reminder? A reminder of what? Mandy Lane asked cautiously as she walked over to Noah by the window. Do you think we need a reminder of our home? Mandy Lane's gaze drifted out, through the large window pane, across the vast ocean and its white crests, and then up to the vast sky with its overarching cloud cover. But don't we get reminded of it every day? With all the microplastics and overfishing, every new Netflix documentary or the latest initiative from the president about. But do we truly understand it? Can I ask you something? Mandy Lane asked softly as she stood next to Noah at the window. Have you come up with a solution? I always come up with a solution. The question is whether I manage to do it justice, whether we understand it, whether I understand it. Is it that guy William who helped you? He helped me put a few things into perspective. Like the form of Kuramoto, Mandy Lane asked. Like the purpose of Kuramoto, Noah answered. But hasn't the purpose always been clear, though? Has it? Noah looked at Mandy Lane. Yes, she replied, clutching the tablet to her chest. That he's a secretary who will eventually replace me. That AI is mankind's most powerful tool ever. I don't think that's the purpose. What is the purpose, then? Mandy Lane stood so close to Noah Jensen that he could feel her elbow brush against his. He could smell her scent, hear the desire in her whisper. He could slice through her thick wonder with his sharp tongue, manipulate her entire life with just the right words, make her blink feverishly as she tried to break free from the greedy trance by backing off in reverence until she bumped into the first chair at the table and toppled backward in confusion. He had her trapped. Maybe it was clout. Maybe it was ambition, creativity, and dreams. Perhaps she was as fertile as she could be in that moment. As a parent, Noah said, you need to first see your flaws, acknowledge your mistakes, then let your child go. I don't understand. What is the purpose of Kuramoto? To consciously reject him, to let him reject us, and see what follows. Are you talking about emancipation? Mandy Lane looked at him. War, she said. Noah looked at her. If it hadn't already arrived with the pressure of the mighty cloud cover outside, it did with the secretary just before the meeting. Maybe it was already too late. Maybe it had been too late for a long time, and perhaps it was inevitable. Humans would always choose sides, and the right side of history would always prevail. Until the right side of history would take the final, inevitable, misguided step. Qui pro quo. Outside, William paused in his work to wipe the sweat dripping in the oppressive climate. He took a sip of water from Mauna Loa and watched the helicopter prepare to land on the rooftop. It must be the last one. He closed his eyes. Wondered exactly what was taking place in the emerging meeting in the conference room several floors above, but then let the thought drift away. He allowed himself to wonder, nothing more. Allowed himself to enjoy, nothing more. Just be, for never had less or more been required. And he swallowed the fresh water, smiled as he exhaled, and then continued to tend to ambition's gardens. Perhaps the retiree could do a course in agriculture. But it was just a thought, and perhaps it would return. Everything tended to find its way home. Eventually.